Inquiry, and I'd like to welcome Daniel Thurkelson from the Coal Action Network and Haf Elgar, who is the Director of Friends of the Earth Cymru. And we'll go straight to Mark Drakeford for the first questions. Mark.
Diolch yn fawr. Dim ond dau cwestiynau sydd â fi. Maen nhw'n cyffredin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've only got two general questions, and I'm sure that other members of the committee will come to the specific questions on Ffos-y-fran in due course.
A general question is to ask that where there are examples in Wales where proper restoration of former open cast sites has not been fully undertaken, what do you think are the main reasons for that? What are the factors that you think that explain those instances where restoration has not been properly completed?
Daniel?
Okay. Hello. I think it's a combination of legislative weakness and corporate greed. As in the case of Celtic Energy's sites over the last 10 years, they've been left in a dire state. And you might know the history to this. It was taken to the Serious Crime Office, and it was looked into. There was a court trial, and the judge said, although the action of the company was reprehensible, it was not illegal. And I think that really underpins some of the issues that we see today at Ffos-y-fran. Nothing has changed since then.
On the most general level, I'd say it's sort of a failed business model, to be honest, or maybe not a failed business model because it has made very tidy profits for the private companies, but it's a model that hasn't worked for public authorities. The idea of that you give planning permission for mining for X number of years with the intention of restoration, and in nearly every case we've seen mining for X number of years, plus usually with additional planning permissions going in asking for extensions to the time for mining. So that coal has been mined, has been sold. We've had the emissions, we've had the impacts on the local communities, but then we don't get the money at the end to restore the site and to make it a public facility. And that's happened time and time again. So yes, there are some specific things around a lack of secured bonds and funding for restoration, issues with that system, the complexity of responsibilities from privatising this in the first place to the UK and devolved bodies and local authorities that have a mix of responsibilities and clarity and discussions between those parties, and possibly, as has been raised, the lack of expertise or capacity within local authorities. But overall, above all of that, I'd say it just doesn't work, and it hasn't worked in any examples, and it's sort of been used as an excuse for mining and for companies making great profits over the years.
Is it inevitable that the system, as it's currently constructed, fails? Are there any examples at all that you can identify of where restoration has been satisfactorily completed?
Earlier, my friend from the Coal Authority mentioned that Tower Colliery was an example of a better restoration job. And I would agree with them. And part of that is because the council required 4 million upfront from the company before they started any works, to cover the largest liability, which is when they start digging the void. However, even in that example, as the Coal Authority observed, that restoration is not complete, and it was due to be complete, I believe, midway through 2022. So that is somewhat overdue. And originally, the company claimed a 2-metre difference in the contours of the land was acceptable. The Coal Authority disagreed with that, and they said actually it's 0.6. So even in that example, which is held up as being a good example, there are still these disagreements with the company. The companies are still trying to get away with a different restoration plan to what was agreed. So in answer, no. I think that the legislative landscape and the weaknesses within that and the profit motives of the companies involved means that there aren't good examples.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'd concur with that. And, Tower is a company which is embedded in the community and maybe feels a sense of responsibility to the local area, which isn't the case with a number of the other companies who sell off or disappear. So overwhelmingly, I'd say it's a story of failure and communities being let down. And of course, because the coal has been burnt, the damage has been done. There's no way to reclaim, the environmental cost of that as well, which is different to other types of planning permission, where if an extension goes up and planning permission isn't given, then the extension could be taken down. But that's not possible when you mine coal and you burn it.
If the position is one of overwhelming failure, then are there particularly concerning examples amongst those open cast sites which were due to have been restored in Wales, but where that hasn't happened? Are there particularly egregious examples that you think the committee ought to be aware of?
I'd certainly highlight East Pit and Margam as sites that are restored in terms of the definition is that restoration is complete but certainly not sufficient, and I'm sure Daniel can speak to more of the detail of this, having as Coal Action Network prepared a detailed report which was referred to earlier in 2022, reviewing all of the sites and looking at the details, but hopefully you'll be speaking to local residents from those areas during the process of this inquiry as well. So those are particularly bad cases, but of course Ffos-y-fran is the big one that we're dealing with now, and hopefully we'll get into more detail as a site which is not yet restored, but that there's still hopefully potential, and we're at a key stage of that site.
Yes, and I actually spoke with local residents living around the Margam Park slip site in March, and they described the site as, it's like the moon, like Mars. All we're asking for is to restore it to some sort of semblance of what it was prior. And that's really what these people want who are living around these sites. And I'd agree that East Pit and Margam Park slip are really strong examples of poorly restored sites. I wouldn't call that a restoration. The site has perhaps been made safe to some degree, but it has not been restored. And that's what they want. They can't move on until their sense of place and purpose, as they put it, has been restored. If that void is filled with water, they can't ride their horses over the land, which is what they did before. Their kids can't play on that. And although these are perhaps two of the worst examples, Cellar is a example of a closed coal mine site which has been restored according to the council. And I visited that site, and there's a large concrete platform with a disused warehouse, oil drums turned over on its side, office chairs strewn around. There is, outside of that warehouse, an open, container, I guess, of goodness knows what liquids in there. There's oil drums leaking into it. There's antifreeze barrels leaking out into the ground. And I have shared this with Natural Resources Wales, and they said that they have been in contact with the local landowner. Nothing's happened. And that is years after the site has been restored according to the council. Similar at East Pit, there's large concrete platforms, disused warehouses. There's an abandoned car in a cargo crate on that land. Like, what are these sites that the councils are saying are restored?
Okay, there we are. Sorry, we lost you momentarily there, Mark. I presume. Yeah, there we are. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Delith then. Oh, sorry, yes, Carolyn, please do, yeah.
So, about the ecological impact of the site as well, and I'm not sure if you'd be able to answer the questions, but could old coal sites be restored for biodiversity value and environmental value, and the water will that be having a damaging impact on the natural environment as well and ecology? I know we've been looking at it from a human point of view, but I'm thinking for the natural environment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there was a recent report published on Welsh biodiversity and the needs to step up. And I think old coal mine sites are a really good location for that sort of biodiversity return if the investment is there. As the Coal Authority mentioned earlier, it would need funding. But that would be funding well spent, both for the local communities in that area who have suffered a burden of coal mining, as well as for the biodiversity in those areas.
The old limestone quarries are very good for biodiversity, but I wasn't sure about the old coal field sites. So thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Harvard.
I was just going to say, yes, absolutely, exactly. You know, these sites, first of all, must be made safe and monitored, and to ensure that whatever was there isn't leaking into groundwater or causing environmental harm is the first stage. But following that stage, a successful restoration should mean that they're, yes, accessible to the public, but also an area of thriving biodiversity. So it is possible to do that. That has been done with some coal tips, which we might come on to discuss, but yes, there's certainly potential there.
Okay, diolch yn fawr iawn. Delyth.
Good morning, it's great to see you. It's really good to have your expertise with us. Thank you very much. Could you, so we're going to be focusing on Ffos-y-fran, that I know is a focal point in all of our minds at the moment. Could you outline, please, for us, firstly, what discussions you've had with the local authority about restoring the site?
Wow. It is quite a difficult question because we've been raising this with the local authority for over a number of years now. You know, once we saw that we were expecting the mining to stop in September 2022, when we saw the new planning permission go in to extend that period, we were engaging constantly with the local authority over that extension, but also raising what happens next. So it's been quite protracted, and it's all throughout the process. I think we'd say it's been quite difficult to get information out of the local authority, whether that's about ensuring that local communities are consulted or basic planning documents, and that continues to be the case. And I let Daniel go into more detail because he's been in contact with the local authority more recently. But you know, local residents who are in touch with regularly have been writing back and forth, trying to get answers out to the local authorities about this, and getting getting replies eventually with a little bit of pushing, and being told everything's okay, we're monitoring, everyone's talking to each other, everything's okay, but not getting any data or any proof or evidence of that. We wrote to them again last week, so when we get a reply, I'm happy to share that with the committee, asking for a number of documentations and who, you know, what expertise was involved and what data did they have. So we continue to try our best to engage, but it's very difficult, and I don't feel that we're getting substantive responses or the necessary data that we or the local community needs.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Hav said. And I would say that our approach with the local council has been one of a partnership approach, what we have tried. And I think that environmental NGOs have a really important role in terms of scrutiny, as well as getting information out to the public domain about what is happening. The response from the council has been protracted, and I would say blocking. I don't think that's an overstatement. I've had to wait over a month before for responses from the local council, and when I have had it, I've had frustrated tones. I think at one point, a member of staff, I won't name them, said that, you know, don't I realise that they are busy and have many other things to do. Meanwhile, we're made aware that there are weekly meetings between the company, between the operator and the council. So clearly that time is there, it's just where they spend the time. And I would agree that there has been very, very little consultation with local communities that are living close to a site. And when I say close to a site, I mean 270 metres as the crow flies from the void itself. That's 270 metres. So that's equivalent to between us and the Odeon cinema around the corner. It is that close. It is on the other side of a motorway, or not a motorway, sorry, a road. That is a void that's filling up with water, and that is a void filling up with water that I'm not aware the council has made any efforts to inform the community living there that that is happening. That's fairly shocking. I know that the planning permission ran out on the 6th of September 2022. On the 12th of September 2022, Chris, a local resident who will be sitting where I am next month, I believe, and will tell you this, sent photographs of fully loaded coal trucks leaving the site to the council, indicative that perhaps active coal mining is still happening and that the council should maybe look into it. The council refused. The council just did not bother. Months and months and months passed. It wasn't until January when I sent official coal authority statistics to the council saying, look, the production is still happening. In fact, it's gone up slightly. How are you responding to this? And then 2 months later, on the 31st of March, I have an email here, I was finally emailed by the council saying, yeah, okay, we realise it has been happening the whole time. The co-operator lied to us. Why didn't they look into that? We sent them photos. And I said the 12th of September, we sent them many photos since then as well. And we were in contact many times, asking, begging the council to please go to a site to see it for themselves. And they refused. And I guess the question there is, why did they refuse? It's not far away. It's their job to independently monitor what the company is telling them. So why didn't they do that?
Could I just pick up on something here? Because Merthyr, of course, council have declined our invitation to come and give oral evidence. So I'll just sort of throw back to you a little bit.
Yeah.
Capacity issues are known within planning departments across Wales and beyond. So you use the word blocking, which suggests that you have a different view to whether it's a capacity issue or whether it's some sort of intentional ploy. But there's also a question about competence as well, isn't there? So there are three, and I'm asking you to tell me what you think it is. Is it incompetence? Is it a lack of capacity? Or is it something, intentional in terms of not wanting to share stuff with you? Or maybe a little bit of each?
I think, yeah, capacity is an issue, and I'm well aware of that. And I wouldn't want to play that down. I think there is an element of of realising that things were not going to plan and not necessarily wanting that to be broadcast. And I think that is mostly where what I described as blocking comes in. Because we're very transparent with our information, and we will put that on our website and share that information because we think it's really important for the local population, not just the local population, also nationally. Over 1,000 tonnes of coal was being mined every single day that illegal coal mining was happening. That has climate consequences, and we believe that everyone needs to know about that. I'm not sure the council shared that perspective. I mean, to put those climate impacts into perspective, over the course of the illegal coal mining, which depends on when you believe that they started and finished, is 14 to 16 months. That is over 600,000 tonnes of coal. It is 1.9 million tonnes of CO2, using the base conversion factors. In terms of additional climate-related deaths, we are talking 428 deaths as a result of this illegal coal mining. that the council did not prevent. And I don't think the council wanted us to broadcast that.
Fine. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Delyth.
And no, not at all. And yet, in spite of these, let's put it charitably, these difficulties in engaging with the company, we're given to understand that the council is still keen to work with them on another restoration plan. Potentially, is a suggestion that that might now incorporate this void filled with water. What are your views on that?
Well, the company still has a duty to carry out the original restoration plan. That's the current situation, is that that's what was in the planning permission that was originally granted. That is their duty. They said, I believe, when they announced a unilateral agreement back in September, that they were going to be discussing with the council, bringing the mining to an end and looking at a restored plan. We were expecting that earlier this year. We now understand that we're talking about late autumn, and it's positive if the company do remain engaged and they actually end up paying for the restoration rather than it becoming a burden on public authorities. But we're now in a sort of in a limbo, in a situation where they're not mining, they're not active on the site, they're not pumping the water out. There's an enormous void which is filling with water. Nobody's sure of what's in that water, whether it's secure, what the environmental impacts of that will be, and very much the safety concerns, especially as we go into summer, and whether people will be attracted to go to that site, whether it's in any way secure. So we're really concerned about delay after delay, and this is just a pattern of behaviour that we've seen by the company, and whatever the reasons or motivations of the councils behind, they continue a negotiation, but we don't see the action. And we're concerned about the consequences of that then, that it sort of becomes a de facto that it'll end up with a really weak, cheap restoration plan, which is basically to fill the void with water because it's already there. And that's not what's legally meant to happen. That's not fair on the community or on the environment. So we wish there was more transparency and openness with the council and with the company, that they were willing to discuss with the local community and with us and other interested parties about what their plans are. But all we're getting at the moment is delays and promises down the line that we're uncertain at all of whether they will be delivered, and just that the risk is increasing all the time.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think perhaps one of the reasons for the delay in submitting that restoration plan is that by the time it does get submitted, it will be a foregone conclusion. That void will be too filled with water to drain. And the councillors sitting on the planning hearing will have no option but to rubber stamp it through. I've got a quote here from a planning officer's report. The return of the landscape to its original form and appearance is not practicable, realistic or deliverable. It has to be accepted also that what is being proposed, whilst not returning the site to its original form, is an improvement on the current situation. That could be about Ffos-y-fran. It was about Margam Park Slip. And I predict we're going to see something very, very similar in the planning officer's report for Ffos-y-fran. In Merthyr South Wales planning application for its extension, its planning statement, they wrote in favour of awarding this extension. This application offers the only, as the council is fully aware, there are insufficient funds within the escrow and restoration fund to allow for the full and successful implementation of the current restoration strategy of this site. So that's the company saying to the council, if you don't give us this extension, we're not going to restore the site. We haven't got the money to restore this site. We'll make the money if you give us what was then asked for a 9-month extension. What they've had is a de facto over a year extension, mining twice what they hoped to mine in that time, and they're still saying they don't have the money for that restoration. I don't buy it.
And on that point, Daniel, you've said in your paper that you were advised that the operator may have acted fraudulently in reporting that it intended to finance restoration and was in a position to do so if it could be proven that the director of the company had no genuine intent to do so. Could you talk us through any evidence that you have to support that, please?
Yeah, let me just find my notes because I don't want to misspeak on this. So we met with several stakeholders some months ago in London. We met with a planning law firm, a prominent legal chambers in London that specialises in this kind of work, and they said that it could be considered to be a Section 4, which is an abuse of position of trust of the Fraud Act, which is subject to the Proceeds of Crime Act. If successful, if that prosecution was successful, it may be possible to obtain a confiscation order against the company, but it would be primarily for the police or the council to bring the case. A third party could bring the case in a private prosecution. And I think that was based on the fact that, I'm no legal expert, so it was based on the fact that the company did funnel nearly £50 million out of the company in dividends and shares since 2017, I believe. They did say in their most recently filed annual returns, they're overdue the next one, but the most recently filed returns says that they have the money to pay for the restoration. They've counted on that.
And this is the restoration in full, as intended originally.
Yeah, the original restoration, which was forecast to be £75 million. Yeah. So, and you can read that. That's on Companies House. So they said they had the money, and at the last moment said, we don't have the money. Where did that money go? I think that was asked earlier. So yeah, based on those kind of facts of the case, and to the best of my very lay legal knowledge, that would be the foundation of any kind of prosecution. But again, to my knowledge, nobody has expressed any interest in taking that prosecution forward.
Okay. Diolch. I'm aware of time, so just one final question from me. In terms of your concerns that you've already outlined to us in your evidence about the inadequacy of the escrow funds and also presumably a possibility that the company could abandon the site or could seek administration, what do you think needs to be done now to avoid, either to avoid the latter happening and also to address the inadequacy of what's done with escrow accounts?
Well, I think the big danger for Ffos-y-fran at the moment is inaction and just letting things slip on. And as I said, by the time we get to maybe a planning proposal in the autumn, it will be too late, both in terms of environmental damage and in terms of that the only option will be to keep a flooded void in essence. So we're pleased to hear about the Coal Authority technical meetings and the pressure coming from there, but really the public authorities need to step up and take control of this. Because we're not getting data or hearing back from the council or seeing the detailed work, it's difficult for us to assess the situation. But we would like to see a much stronger position from the council and from the Welsh Government as well to step in, because this is a really serious issue and it will fall back on public authorities to pay for restoration if it all goes wrong in any case. But really the priority has to be given to taking action, to not letting this just drag on, and for public authorities to pressure for this to take place.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to have to move on, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Caroline.
So you've touched on it already, so I was just going to expand on the role of local authorities and the Welsh Government in this. So the Chair touched on this earlier. Do you think that Welsh local authorities have the necessary minerals planning expertise to ensure appropriate restoration of open cast sites and enforcement as well, I think, because enforcement is sometimes different to actually the officers dealing with planning. So again, your observations on that. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so we obviously it's been mentioned before that the Carmarthenshire expertise in terms of mineral planning was used by Merthyr when the extension to Ffos-y-fran was being considered. So that seemed to be a good sharing of resources. I'm sure that local authorities, we know that all local authorities are under capacity and will lack expertise, especially for some very technical issues that maybe they don't rely on very often. So in many cases, it would require bringing in independent expertise on hydrology and geology, and that's what we would expect rather than everything being in-house or even shared between councils. So there are options like that. In terms of enforcement, we've certainly seen whether it's a lack of ability or willingness, we don't know in terms of motive from Merthyr Council when the mining was happening beyond planning permission, as Daniel already mentioned. We were pushing for enforcement action and for stop notices to be given to the company. That didn't happen until eventually, I believe, in June. So after the council had unanimously rejected the proposal, they then issued an enforcement notice. But then neither they nor the Welsh Government actually issued a stop notice. So actually, the really strong action that they had the powers to take in order to stop that mining taking place. So we've definitely seen an unwillingness to use the powers that they have even. But in addition to that, I'm sure there are issues in terms of lack of technical specialisation in-house.
And I'll just add to that, I think that lack of technical specialisation or lack of technical knowledge is particularly prominent when it comes to the councillors. Understandably, their technical knowledge is limited, so they are very heavily dependent on the planning officer's report and the technical mineral expertise within that report. To the extent that the independence that they can make in terms of their independent decision making and the democracy behind that is limited, because that report is so influential on the councillors' thinking that I think that is something, I think some kind of mineral training or expertise could be conferred onto councillors that are making the ultimate decisions of whether to approve or reject a planning application when it comes to something like a coal mine, because there is such an asymmetry of knowledge there. But I think more of the problem is that these coal mines are so big, they dwarf the size of the local authority. That it's like, if you build an extension and you build it, half a foot out from what you said, and everyone can relate to this, the council will be down on you like a ton of bricks, so to speak. When it comes to a massive coal mine, they can mine illegally for a year and nothing happens to them. There are no consequences. Not one penny of the company's profits have been touched, despite mining illegally for over a year, with such greater consequences than what your conservatory will have for being a foot out of line or using the wrong type of glass. And I think that is what's really key here. It's not the mineral expertise, but how can a local authority, weighing up the costs and benefits of issuing a stop notice with the company quitting the site, and then suddenly they have this huge abandoned coal mine site on their doorsteps and they didn't know what to do with that. How can they hold a company to account in those circumstances?
Do you think it's an issue? So the planning officer, minerals planning officer, would give the planning and write that all in the report. Are they in charge of enforcement, and then the legal enforcement, the legal team that would have to look into it? Do you think there's an issue with it all being separate and not working together, as well as lack of resources within the local authority? So do you think actually within that local authority that talking together and working together is an issue?
Briefly.
Sorry, yeah, very briefly. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is that they were afraid of the company quitting the site, and that was in the ministerial advice sent to Mark Drakeford and Julie James at the time. They interviewed the coal authority and they interviewed the local council, and the local council said, one reason why we've not done it is we're afraid they'll quit the site, and then what are we going to do?
So my other question was, so did Welsh local authorities take on board recommendations of Welsh Government's 2014 report on failure to restore open cast sites and adapt their approach accordingly? Have you got any more to add than that? It sounds like they haven't.
Only that I haven't seen any evidence of them doing so.
Okay, what role should the Welsh Government, Coal Authority and Natural Resources Wales play in securing restoration of sites in Wales? Earlier, previous evidence, we have this concern that maybe you need somebody to actually lead on this. So you've got 3 authorities who are responsible, but is there anybody actually leading or putting plans in place? Your thoughts on that, please.
Yes, I think a lead person, be that the Coal Authority or another body, would be a good idea. It's certainly, we know that we've been passed from pillar to post on who is responsible for this, and we've been lobbying all parties to no avail.
Okay, thank you. And just finally with me, what mechanisms should be put in place to ensure community involvement and input into site restoration, given TAN2 emphasises the importance of consultation? You mentioned that earlier, Daniel, that you've been talking to the local community.
Yeah, absolutely. There is traditionally not very much consultation at all. There's a consultation period, so if this application were to go forward for a downgraded restoration or simply to make the site safe, there will be some kind of public consultation during that time. I don't think that's adequate. It's not substantive. I think that public consultation needs to be ongoing as well. That's a good practice of public consultation, so it's ongoing. And I think there needs to be a role for that local community to really have a substantive role in shaping exactly what's going to happen on the site. I think it would be a mistake to limit that to thinking we've got 15 million, how do we restore the site on 15 million? We don't restore the site on 15 million, that can't happen.
Okay, thank you.
If I can just come in quickly on this as well. At the moment, any involvement would be welcome because there is none. They are being really left in the dark. And I think we have to remember the local community haven't just lived with this over the last couple of months or couple of years. The mining's been happening since 2007, and they've been suffering from the dust and the noise and all the impact on their local lives. And this was promised to them in the first place as an opportunity to restore the site so that it would be available to them. So in addition to the official sort of consultation channels that the council has to follow when a planning application comes before them, I think this needs to be a community-led process, and for them to be involved in the development and in proposals rather than just having a week or two to respond to something in a council system. So we would welcome involvement from the local residents, because they really are the experts on their local area as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Iawn, wel mae hwnna'n mynd â ni felly i'r
Right, well, that takes us into an area where I'd be keen to ask some questions on. I would just like to ask a question or two about legislation and policy. So obviously you're unhappy with the regime as it is. I assume that you'd be keen to see some kind of changes to legislation or policy in order to ensure that sites are restored successfully. And if you were, what specifically would you like to see happen?
So something that we often hear when we discuss Ffos-y-fran and other sites is, oh, well, we don't want to start from this position, it's too late, we can't change things retrospectively. Even with the report coming out in 2014, well, the planning consent was given before that. So we often hear that it's difficult to change things that have already been decided. But certainly there is a need for change, to restore the sites that have already been mined and that do need now to be restored. But we need to think ahead too, to ensure that the situation never arises again. I don't want to be here in 10 years' time hearing what's gone wrong And the most prominent area where this could happen is with the coal tips. So even though these are matters and issues that are dealt with separately, it would make sense to me if we bring these regimes together, or we could face 200 other sites in terms of the coal tips. There could be mined for coal with promises of restoration, and that never happened. So it's a cycle in that sense. So in terms of thinking about the legislation that is needed, we need to ensure that the funding is in place. As the coal authorities said, we know the situation of sites that haven't yet been restored in Wales. We know what the problems are. So it's not so much an assessment that's needed, but the funding to restore those sites adequately. And in that regard, I would call on the United Kingdom government to allocate additional funding so that work can be done in Wales. I understand that the budgets in Wales are very tight. We do think that additional funding is needed from the UK government to enable that work to be done in a way that is centrally managed and with a role for public bodies in Wales, so that the duty doesn't fall on any specific or individual local authority. So that funding is needed to restore the current sites, but also looking to the future to ensure that this situation never arises again, and that we don't open the door for a new mining industry to mine those sites on the coal tips.
Nôl, 5 minutes ar ôl. Gai just ofyn felly, yn amlwg i ni'n ymwybodol.
Obviously, we're aware that Welsh Government are currently preparing the coal tips bill. We had hoped that we would see it by now. It seems that it will come at some point during the summer. But could I ask, do you think that that bill should include the open cast mines in its scope? And are you aware whether that's something that the government has considered, or have you been part of any discussions about that?
We would welcome that to happen, that the bill that comes forward does deal with those sites too. We've heard about the plan that will be going before Caerphilly County Council in terms of Bedwas. The intention of the company is to take the coal from the tip, to sell it, and then to burn it, and then to restore the site. And even though that's seen as in a different context, that it is restoring a coal tip, but when there are concerns about the safety of coal tips, that does have to be a priority. But there is a risk that will open the door to another industry of extracting coals from the tips to be sold and burnt with the promise of restoration. And if we go into that cycle of depending on private companies to do that work with a promise at the end to fund restoration, that is a great risk. So we need to ensure that that doesn't happen. And it's very relevant that the coal tips bill is an opportunity to address that issue. We haven't yet had discussions about whether that is possible, but certainly with the bill coming forward, hopefully there will be an opportunity to do that.
Aware, Delith, that time is running away from us. Is there anything you wanted to raise? Enforcement is the basic issue here, isn't it? In that the obligations that were set as part of the planning process just aren't being implemented?
Yeah, I think so, but also we need to create a situation that not just that it can be enforced, but the money is there up front, because you can't get the money afterwards. And I'm hoping that maybe amendments to the Infrastructure Wales Bill could play a role in that as well. We've heard from the Welsh Government that the policies, coming from the Welsh Government are the most progressive in the UK. It's not true. Scotland has passed a coal ban, so they have banned all forms of coal mining in Scotland after their experience. That happened in October 2022. Something like that could happen here. The Welsh coal policies are clearly not strong enough. What's happened at Ffos-y-fran is in direct contravention with national policy in Wales. I don't think it's just an enforcement issue. I think it's also a policy issue. I think policy needs to change, it needs to be strengthened. I think that the Welsh Government needs to look to the Scottish Government and catch up.
I think that was a very good way of ending.
Ma hwnna'n le.
Yes, that's an appropriate place for us to bring the session to an end. Could I thank both of you for coming here and being here with us and sharing your evidence with us? The committee will now break for 5 minutes so that we can prepare the room for the next panel. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.